You see, if we were going to be a world power, we were flanked on both sides, by the Atlantic Ocean on one side, the Pacific on the other. And we had a great Navy. We built our Navy up to the second largest Navy in the world. And I knew that future threats to our country would come from our Pacific side. And our Navy had been concentrated in the Atlantic Ocean. And to be able to move our Navy quickly from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we needed to build the big ditch, because it took months to go around the tip of South America. So we built the big ditch, and we did it under budget and ahead of schedule. Bully! One of my proudest achievements, and another reason for pride in that is, the French tried to do it before us and failed. And if we could do something the French couldn't do, bully! Another achievement is the conservation of natural resources. You see, I was responsible for developing, bully! I have it written down, the numbers I can't remember anymore. I think it was 5 national parks and national monuments and bird refuges and national conservation sites. It was over 230 million acres that I set aside for future generations, including the Grand Canyon, including Olympic National Park up in the state of Washington. Okay? Yosemite actually was set aside by President Lincoln. It was really the first federal land set aside by President Abraham Lincoln. He was a pretty busy guy during the Civil War, yet found time to set this land aside that we now call Yosemite National Park, a bully place. I visited there while I was president. I spent 5 days in Yosemite Valley with that Scotsman. His name was Johnny Muir. Yeah. Can you imagine a president today being out of touch for 5 days? You see, we could do that in my day. We went tramping and camping with Johnny Muir, who knew Yosemite better than anyone. Okay, so I had a great time there. Other questions? Someone else had a question. Back there with the microphone.
Thank you. Mr. President, my name is Jane, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your partnership with Eleanor. Not me, but some of your opponents have even muttered that she was running the presidency behind the scenes, and I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your relationship with her in the presidency.
Okay, interesting question there, because Eleanor, you see, was my niece. Eleanor was my brother's daughter. And my brother, you see, didn't live very long. He was in his mid-30s, and he enjoyed alcohol more than anything, and that killed him. And his niece, or his daughter, was Eleanor. And Eleanor, you see, met Franklin. He was the Hyde Park Roosevelts. We were the Long Island Roosevelts. And I think it was 5 generations before me, the Roosevelt family came over from the Netherlands. And essentially, that next generation broke into, the western shore of the Hudson River Roosevelts, the Hyde Park Roosevelts, and then the Long Island Roosevelts, or New York Roosevelts. And Eleanor met Franklin, who was of the Hyde Park, and decided to marry him. And in their wedding, because my brother had passed away, I walked Eleanor down the aisle. So, it's kind of a historical footnote that here's a sitting president walking his niece down the aisle to marry a future president. Okay? Well, and Franklin patterned his career after mine. As I was, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. As I was, he was Governor of New York. As I was, he was President. You see, he began his career as a Republican, but he was a good politician. And he took advantage of the fact that he could get elected more easily as governor of New York as a Democrat, so he switched parties. And there was quite a rift between the two families at that point, and they finally buried the hatchet here. I think it was in 1997 at a family get-together. the Hyde Park Roosevelts and the Long Island Roosevelts. So that's kind of an interesting story. We have time, I think, for 1 or 2 more questions. One more here. Go ahead.
Mr. President, with all your experience and knowledge and what you've gone through, what advice might you give for our current president?
Oh, dear. To have courage. To have courage. Have convictions, have principles, and stick to them. Regardless of what your political ideas are, because we could argue those in this room, no doubt about it. And in my day, we argued them, viciously. But it takes courage to stand to your convictions and not sway with the breeze. When you take back a look at presidents throughout this nation, we're up to how many? I was number 26. The current president is what, 40? 44. Okay, and many of those presidents weren't successful because they didn't stick to their principles. When you take a look at those handful of presidents, in fact, I've got the honor to be carved out on that mountain in South Dakota with three of the other greatest presidents. Notice I said other. It's three of the other greatest presidents that we've ever had. Of course, number one, George Washington, the indispensable man. For without George Washington, there may not be the United States of America. And then my hero, Abraham Lincoln, whose greatest contribution, in my opinion, was the fact that before Abraham Lincoln, this country was referred to as these United States of America. After Abraham Lincoln, it was referred to as the United States of America. He kept this union together. And then, of course, number three, Thomas Jefferson. I never really did have much good to say about Thomas Jefferson, but he did strike a pretty good deal with the French, didn't he? In terms of acquiring a good portion of land that we called, the Louisiana Purchase, which includes grand areas like the Yellowstone area, Bully area. There may be some other questions. We've simply run out of time for that, so I have to close this press conference. And I want to close the program here really with a tribute to those people historically who have served this nation in our military services, because this nation is quite an exceptional nation in terms of its form on the basis of an idea. And many of us in this room are immigrants ourselves, or our forebears were immigrants. Okay. And it started with on the streets of Boston, when innocent civilians were gunned down by British militia in what became overnight known as the Boston Massacre. Okay, the Boston Massacre. And we had a revolution, and we gained our independence from the British. And many young citizens gave their life to start this new nation. And a few years later, in 1812, the British came back and tried to take us again. And what did we do? We stood up and we drove them back across the pond a second time. Bully. We were challenged again in the 1830s in the Texas territories at a place called the Alamo, okay, where the Mexican army came and slaughtered several Americans. So how did we respond to that? Well, we made Texas the next state, didn't we? And we drove the Mexican army across the Rio Grande. We were challenged again, you see, when the Spanish blew up the USS Maine. We already talked about that story. And we were challenged again in December of 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And we rose up to that challenge. And we were challenged once again on September 11, 2001 in New York City, just a few short blocks where I grew up. In Arlington, Virginia, just across the Potomac from the White House, and in an empty field in Pennsylvania. Will we prevail on this? Of course we will. This is the United States of America. And through the efforts of those, through the efforts of those who have given their all, we couldn't get John Philip Sousa live today. He was booked somewhere else. So through the wonders of your new technology you have today, we have a reasonable facsimile. So we're going to play the different anthems of the military services. And if you served yourself, or have a family member serving now, or having served in that branch, please stand while that anthem is being played here. So this will take about 2 or 3 minutes. Maestro. This is the anthem of the United States Coast Guard. So if you or have a family member serving in the Coast Guard, please stand. It's called Semper Paratus, always prepared. Your dad. Bully. Coast Guard's probably playing a more important role today than ever in their history. United States Air Force or United States Army Air Corps. My youngest son, Quentin, in the Great War, you know, call it World War I, was an Army aviator, shot down, gave his life behind enemy lines. He was 21 years old. First Roosevelt to die in battle. United States Navy. The very first ship deployed after September 11, 2001 was the USS Theodore Roosevelt. 90,000 tons of diplomacy, affectionately known by her crew as the Big Stick. The United States Marine Corps, who this October will be celebrating their 235th year birthday. Understand there were a lot of Marines posted here in this part of the country up until a few years ago. The United States Army. The United States Army celebrated their 235th birthday on June 14th this year. Most of us call it Flag Day. In the Army, it's Army Day. May God bless you all, and may God bless the United States of America. Bully.